Okay, let's get into the next part of the series by talking about Edgar Cayce. Now, Edgar Cayce was born in 1877, died in 1945, and he was a Christian mystic, but also known as a sleeping prophet. And he helped many people with different kinds of holistic cures, and he did psychic readings in his sleep. He created a hospital in Virginia and a research and enlightenment center as well. Now, the Research and Enlightenment Center is still in existence in Virginia today. Some people associate him with the New Age movement. I don't really. I just kind of look at him as another piece of the puzzle, a mystic, a clairvoyant. What is very interesting about him is that a lot of his work, well, not a lot, but a certain amount of it, talked about Atlantis. And he also did some predictions about finding what I believe is the Nag Hammadi library. He talked about the Essenes quite a bit, and that their library would be found. And that library wasn't found until, I believe, after his death. So he wrote a lot, and his children took over his work and the Enlightenment Center. And you could get quite a few books today, or just get the whole library of all of his readings. But I, in particular, have been trying to look at what he wrote about Atlantis, because he wrote some very, very interesting, mysterious things. Now, there's a book written by, I think it's his son, Hugh Lynn Cayce. It's called Edgar Cayce on Atlantis. And on page 48, this is what was written in one of the readings that he gave while in the sleep state. And he wrote, and it's written that he said, "In the land now known as Utah or Nevada, when the first peoples were separated into groups as families, the entity developed much and gave much to the people who were to succeed in that land. And in the ruins, as are found in the mounds and caves, in the northwestern portion of New Mexico, may be seen some of the drawings the entity then made, some 10 million years ago." End quote. So very interesting. He's saying that the oldest part of the land in this world were parts of New Mexico and Utah and Nevada. And it's interesting because he's also referring to petroglyphs and pictographs in mounds and caves, talking about drawings that the entity made. And we have very interesting petroglyphs and pictographs of these large-eyed beings that are much taller than the other figures next to it. So, again, this is a psychic. How much, do you give credit to it? I don't know. But continuing on, in that book, Edgar Cayce on Atlantis by Hugh Lynn Cayce, on pages 52 to 53, they wrote, "The position the continent of Atlantis occupied is between the Gulf of Mexico on the one hand and the Mediterranean upon the other. Evidences of the lost civilization are to be found in the Pyrenees and Morocco, British Honduras, Yucatan, and America. There are some protruding portions that must have at one time or another been a portion of this great continent. The British West Indies, or the Bahamas, are a portion of same that may be seen in the present. In the geological survey, or if the geological survey would be made in some of these, especially or notably in Bimini and in the Gulf Stream through the vicinity, These may be even yet determined. Okay, continuing on, he wrote or said, in Atlantean land, when there were the attempts to reconstruct the activities of the people after the second of upheavals or breaking up of the land or continent, applied materially electricity or electrical forces. In Atlantis, during time of readjustment, formed period of second destruction. In Atlantean land, just after second breaking up of the land, owing to misapplication of divine laws upon these things of nature or of the earth, when there were the eruptions from the second, using of those influences that were for man's own development, yet becoming destructive forces to flesh when misapplied. That's from Edgar Cayce on Atlantis, page 106. So he's talking about a second destruction of eruptions. Now, interestingly, there's this Botarini Codex. It is depicting the escape from Aztlan after a volcanic eruption. And if you get into other authors, for example, Manley P. and Plato, they also talk about Atlantis. For example, in Manley P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he wrote, in the Critias, Plato describes in detail the divine foundation of the Atlantean Empire, originally known as Poseidonus, the golden age preserved in myth and legend, when the gods walked with men, depicts the zenith of Atlantean civilization. The demigods of the ancient world were the Atlanteans, to whom every civilized nation owes an incalculable debt of gratitude. In the British Museum, there is a remarkable document known as the Troano manuscript, which was written over 3,500 years ago by the Mayas of Yucatan, containing an authentic account of the cataclysm which sank the continent of Atlantis. This priceless document contains the following statement according to the translation by Li Plungian. Quote, in the year 6 Khan, on the 11th Mulak, in the month Zak, there occurred terrible earthquakes which continued without interruption until the 13th Chuan. The country of the hills of mud, the land of Mu, was sacrificed, being twice upheaved. It suddenly disappeared during one night, the basin being continually shaken by volcanic forces. Being confined, these caused the land to sink and to rise several times and in various places. At last the surface gave way, and 10 countries were torn asunder and scattered, unable to stand the forces that caused the land to sink and to rise several times and in various places. At last the surface gave away, and 10 countries were torn asunder and scattered, unable to stand the force of the convulsions. They sank with the 64 million inhabitants. Before the Atlantean continent was submerged, the initiates of the Atlantean mysteries, carrying with them the secret doctrines entrusted to their keeping, immigrated into Egypt and other parts of the earth, where they would be safe from the impending catastrophe. Thus their secret teaching, with its priceless value of subsequent ages, was preserved. They established centers of learning and promulgated the code, clothed in the language of symbolism, to such as they deem worthy to receive it. That's from Manley P. Hall's The Teaching of the Ages. Now, talking a little further, I'll just quote some of Plato's passages from Timaeus and Critias. Here's one from page 131. At that time, as we said, Atlantis was an island larger than Libya and Asia put together. Though it was subsequently overwhelmed by earthquakes and is the source of the impenetrable mud, which prevents the free passage of those who sail out of the straits into the open sea, end quote. So basically, he confirms that there was a large island beyond the pillars of Heracles, and that because of the destruction, it was difficult to travel at that point. Plutarch mentions some interesting things. Now, as I said before about Osiris and Isis, he says, now Osiris and Isis changed from good minor deities into gods, but the power of Typhon weakened and crushed, but still fighting and struggling against extinction. They try to console and mollify by certain sacrifices, but again, there are times when at certain festivals they humiliate and insult him by assailing red-headed men with jeering and by throwing an ass over the edge of the precipice, as the people of Copta do, because Typhon had red hair and in color resembled an ass. That's from Plutarch's Moralia, Volume 5, Isis and Osiris, page 73. And it's interesting because, Typhon in this case would be Set, who is Prometheus, in my opinion. They characterize him as being red in color, like the red race, and red hair. And we know that there was a global travel of this red-haired people. Going further into Diodorus Siculus' The Library of History, Book 3, pages 145 to 147, he also wrote what I think is a description of Atlantis. Here's what he wrote. For there lies out in the deep off Libya an island of considerable size, and situated as it is in the ocean, it is distant from Libya, a voyage of a number of days to the west. Its land is fruitful, much of it being mountainous, and not a little being a level plain of surpassing beauty. And not a little being a level plain of surpassing beauty. Though it flow navigable rivers which are used for irrigation, and the island contains many parks planted with trees of every variety and gardens in great multitudes, which are traversed by streams of sweet water. On it also private villas of costly construction, and throughout the gardens banqueting houses have been constructed in a setting of flowers, and in them the inhabitants pass their time during the summer season, since the land supplies in abundance everything which contributes to enjoyment and luxury. In speaking generally, the climate of the island is so altogether mild that it produces in abundance the fruits of the trees and the other seasonal fruits for the larger part of the year, so that it would appear that the island, because of its exceptional felicity, were a dwelling place of a race of gods and not of men. Okay, so he's describing this place, and it almost sounds like they have an endless spring and summertime. The non-ending spring and summertime. And we've seen and heard about that in other myths around the world. Again, Plato says in his Timaeus and Critias on page 131, he says, at that time, as we said, Atlantis was an island larger than Libya and Asia put together, though it was subsequently overwhelmed by earthquakes, and is the source of the impenetrable mud which prevents the free passage of those who sail out of the straits into the open sea. So he's describing it again, as I had read before. So we have multiple descriptions of this place, and that it was destroyed finally with earthquakes and probably the final flood. What's interesting is in the Bible, there is a prophecy against Tyre. And this prophecy describes it as an island going below the waters. But Tyre exists today. It's a coastal city, and it never went below the waters. But I'm going to read a little bit of this and show you what it says. Now, this comes from Ezekiel, and it's Ezekiel 26. I'm going to read a little bit of it. A prophecy against Tyre. In the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Mortal, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, Aha, broken is the gateway of the peoples. It is swung open to me, I shall be replenished, now that it is wasted. Therefore thus says the Lord God, See, I am against you, O Tyre. I will hurl many nations against you. As the sea hurls its waves, they shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down its towers. I will scrape its soil from it and make it a bare rock. It shall become in the midst of the sea, a place for spreading nets. I have spoken, says the Lord God. It shall become plunder for the nations, and its daughter towns in the country shall be killed by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. For thus says the Lord God, I will bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, king of kings, together with horse, chariots, cavalry, and a great powerful army. Your daughter towns in the country he shall put to the sword. He shall set up a siege wall against you, cast up a ramp against you, and raise a roof of shields against you. He shall direct the shock of his battering rams against your walls, and break down your towers with his axes. His horses shall be so many that their dust shall cover you. At the noise of cavalry, wheels, and chariots, your very walls shall shake. When he enters your gates, like those entering a breached city, with the hoofs of his horses, he shall trample all your streets. He shall put your people to the sword, and your strong pillars shall fall to the ground. They will plunder your riches and loot your merchandise. They shall break your walls and destroy your fine houses. Your stones and timber and soil they shall cast into the water. I will silence the music of your songs. The sound of your lyres shall be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock. You shall be a place for spreading nets. You shall never again be rebuilt. For I, the Lord, have spoken, says the Lord God. Thus says the Lord God of Tyre. Shall not the coastlands shake at the sound of your fall, when the wounded groan, when slaughter goes on within you? Then all the princes of the sea shall step down from their thrones. They shall remove their robes and strip off their embroidered garments. They shall clothe themselves with trembling and shall sit on the ground. They shall tremble every moment and be appalled by you. And they shall raise a lamentation over you to say, How you have vanished from the seas, O city renowned, once mighty on the sea, you and your inhabitants who imposed your terror on all the mainland. Now the coastlands tremble on the day of your fall. The coastlands by the sea are dismayed by your passing. For thus says the Lord, I will make you a city laid waste, like cities that are not inhabited. When I bring up the deep over you, and the great waters cover you, then I will thrust you down with those who descend into the pit, to the people of long ago, and I will make you live in the world below, among primeval ruins, with those who go down to the pit, so that you will not be inhabited, or have a place in the land of the living. I will bring you to your dreadful end, and you shall be no more. Though sought for, you will never be found again, says the Lord God. And this basically continues on and talks, about how the whole Tyre was gone, and it continues into other nations that went against Israel and get thrusted down. But the point is, that just sure sounds like Atlantis. That it was it was thrust down into the midst of the sea, the pit, from the people of ancient long ago. Now, as I said, Tyre exists today. There's people that live there, but there's also ruins as well. So we have some kind of a strange, possibly biblical reference to old Atlantis in the Bible, in my opinion. And, Tyre is in Lebanon right now today. So, with that said, I'm going to conclude this part of the series by looking just briefly at some of these elongated skulls and some pictures of skull models that I took at a local college. And what you could see is that the earlier hominids had smaller skulls than modern man, although Neanderthal does have some kind of a sloping going on and a larger skull than the modern man today. And then you have the artificially binded skull model. But we know that there are very, very strange skulls around the world. Right now there are skulls in the Paracas skulls in South America that haven't been completely destroyed, and they sure look huge. They don't look like they were created by head binding. And we also know that many of these skeletons were either destroyed, deliberately taken by the Smithsonian, and who knows what happened to them. But these have been found all around the world. We also know that there is evidence of cannibalism, not done by the Neanderthals, but done on them. There were whole families of Neanderthals, which seemed to be some kind of a mix, that were cannibalized. And other people as well. We also know that there was a significant amount of cannibalism going on amongst the Aztecs and some of the, whomever they were, people of the southwest of America. There were lots of testimony to that, and Dr. Christy Turner, who's no longer with us, proved that out by finding over 70 sites associated with the southwestern inhabitants of quite a while ago in ancient America, that there was definitely evidence of warfare and cannibalism. So with that said, and showing, further hints of this ancient Atlantis and its destruction, we're going to now, and possibly some, hints of this, what happened to the survivors and some of the mixing of whatever it was, creating these elongated skull beings. And we know that there was a problem of cannibalism. Now, there, that supports evidence further of a hidden past. Let's now go on to the next part of this series and talk about modern day abductees. Thank you.